Welcome to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Farrar, everyone. Chuck and I are recording this show on November 1st, 2024. It is day 982 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Just to remind folks, it's day 982 of the full-scale invasion, but Russia has been fighting Ukraine for almost a decade now, Chuck, since it illegally annexed Crimea and created those fake people's republics called the Luhansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic. That's a long time.
That is a long time. And it's interesting how Russia's initial phases of this aggression were carried out masterfully in what was then much fawned over by military analysts around the world, who called this a masterful display of what they felt 21st century warfare was going to be. Spoiler alert, that isn't what happened, but it was called hybrid warfare. General Gerasimov came out with a paper, much read. I read it myself, of course, in translation. But it said wars in the future will be total wars, where the military kinetic aspect of the war will only be a small part, and the major parts will be informational, cultural, economic, legal, meaning lawfare. And that 10-year effort was so successful with the little green men. Those aren't our soldiers. They don't have any rank or insignias on them. They managed to build a $1 billion bridge to Crimea, and inch by inch, newspaper article by newspaper article, wrench it away from the sovereign nation to which it belonged. It's funny. Papers were written, if you live in my world, you're reading military white papers all the time. This was the way of the future. This is the way wars are going to be fought. And not one person said, no, hobbyist drones are going to change warfare forever. Nobody saw that.
And they have changed warfare. We're going to talk a little bit about that in this show. But hybrid warfare, where information and an assault on a country's culture and history and language really is a blueprint for genocide, Chuck. And when you look at what the occupation forces of Russia have done in Luhansk and Donetsk, in Zaporizhia, in Kherson Oblast, where they have occupied Ukrainian towns and cities, that this is where they are committing a genocide by practically turning or attempting to turn the Ukrainian people against themselves, their own country, their language, their culture. This, in addition to all the torture we know that occurs every day.
Imagine the cynicism of this. You invade a neighboring country, and stop me if you've heard this from World War II before. You invade a neighboring country saying your own ethnic minorities in this country are being attacked. So you invade and you kill the local population. You orphan hundreds of thousands of children that you take into custody and scatter throughout the Russian Arctic and Siberia all the time. Every moment that you do this, you scream, Ukrainians are Nazis, and they're killing Russian-speaking citizens in the East. It is absolutely diabolical. Does it work? Yes. You keep saying something, as Dr. Goebbels will tell you, you keep saying it again and again and again. Ukrainians are Nazis, which is why they elected a Jewish president. They're Nazis, they're criminals, and you and I are old enough to remember when the Soviet Union did this. Whatever you are doing, and especially the more obscene it is, you accuse the other side of doing it. And remarkably, it works.
It does work, and it is remarkable, and it takes so long, it seems, for ordinary people to wake up to the real news. The real news is about what Russia is doing to Ukraine's cities, to its infrastructure. Yesterday, 2 500-kilogram glide bombs struck residential buildings in Kharkiv. Kharkiv is struck almost every day. 2 children were killed, 24 wounded. Just earlier today, 2 S-300 missiles struck in downtown Kharkiv, hitting a police station and surrounding residential buildings. At least 1 person has been killed, at least 26 wounded. And now we have the recovery effort by Ukraine's first responders, sometimes taking 24 hours or longer to pull survivors from the rubble. Why doesn't the world see this relentless assault on Ukraine's citizens for what it is, Chuck?
Well, there is media bandwidth, right? There is only so much time for news in a half-hour news block, spacing out the commercials. And I want everyone to just stop and think of that. It's not about news, it's about the commercials. There's only X amount of time for the news. And the news is the US election, maybe the weather. Nobody wants to see dead Ukrainian children being pulled out of buildings. They just don't. And it is a difficult thing to watch. And I'm sorry for whatever that is, Alan. I don't know if you can hear that, but I'll make it stop.
Well, I don't know. It could be the grill here in the other room too.
I think a phone somebody left here in the studio.
And also for anyone suggesting that Ukraine should consider a peace deal in which it gives up territory for a ceasefire or for a so-called peace with Russia, because we know there is no peace with Russia, that would mean leaving hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians stranded in occupied Ukraine. Their lives would be at risk. They would be forced to give up their Ukrainian passports for Russian passports. If they refused to exchange passports, they would be denied medical care. They might lose their home to a Russian settler. They might not be able to have a job or go to university or go to school or even drive a car.
Which is what they are doing now. If you have the good fortune to actually own a car and have some gasoline in it, the first time you get to a Russian checkpoint, you're going to be asked that question. Where are your Russian documents? Without those, just as you said, you can't get any public services. But more importantly, you have no legal redress. I can come into your yard, kick in your front door and say, I live here now, and you don't have any standing in the courts, just as you've said, Russian settlers, which has happened in Crimea, it has happened in Kherson, it has happened in Donetsk, Luhansk. This is an imperial war of aggression. The other thing is, we only need look to recent history to see what course these negotiations and land for peace would entail. You just need to look at the first Chechen war, where Russia fought for a year. They weren't doing too well. They had an armistice, licked their wounds, resupplied their military larders, and they came back in, where they killed every single one of their enemies, and they plucked a blood-soaked maniac out of the rabble that had turned against their own people, and they put him on the throne of Chechnya. No one in their right mind no one in the right mind could actually think you can negotiate with the Russians. Are you going to talk to Lavrov? He told Liz Truss 24 hours before the invasion that there was not going to be an invasion. You're going to talk to this guy? So there is no land for peace. The other thing is, what do you mean land for peace? This was our country. You attacked us.
Exactly. And, if anyone thinks Russia is interested in peace, they're not. They might be interested in a frozen conflict in order to lick their wounds and come back with renewed force and terror. That's all a frozen conflict or peace negotiations would get for Ukraine. You could just look at the number of attack drones, suicide drones that Russia has launched in the month of October. It amounts to almost 30% of all the attack drones launched against Ukraine since January 1st, 2024. Now, that is almost unimaginable. And in the month of October, more than 2,000 drones launched against Ukrainian cities, infrastructure, hospitals, markets, primarily against Ukrainian citizens. For the entire year to date, about 7,000 Russian attack drones have been launched. This is not Russia slowing down its assault in order to open a door to negotiations of some kind. Rather, this is Russia again escalating its war against Ukraine.
Absolutely. This is the culmination now, as we're getting into the real mud season here in autumn. This is the culmination of the time of consequence. We say it again. Mike Johnson started this offensive last Christmas when he cut off aid to Ukraine. The Russians set about planning a summer of offensive activities. Notice I didn't say a summer offensive because in terms of military terms of art, they haven't launched a summer offensive. They have launched these meat wave attacks at various places. But this was entirely predictable. And, shortages of Ukrainian ammunition shortages, artillery shortages, air defense assets stretched to their absolute limit. This was what Russia was going to do and always was going to do. What we'll have to see is what happens after American Thanksgiving, the end of November. Let's see what happens with the onset of colder weather. I expect Russia to keep doing what it is doing now on a slightly smaller scale, and that means quota attacks along the points of contact. Again, daylight attacks, wasteful, inept, putting on a clinic for what not to do in a military action. I posted a video yesterday that absolutely typified a Russian attack. 3 vehicles, broad daylight. They did spread out this time, so they were not in column, but they did not conduct what's called fire and maneuver or fire and movement. Fire and movement is you cover me and I advance. I stop and I cover you. No. I have seen teenagers on Call of Duty conduct better attacks than this. And the infantry dismounted, looked at the tree line, and decided to run away. And there you go. That's a Russian attack. That's what they look like.
I saw that same video, and it's nothing to laugh about, of course, but truly, when the infantry dismounts, it is, and this is a video from the perspective of a drone, so you don't get to see the looks on their faces, but you can imagine the looks from the reaction they have just taking one look at this tree line, recognizing the firepower that Ukraine has concealed there, they turn tail.
And it's what they've done time and time again. Larger scale attacks, 20 vehicles, as many as 60 vehicles. When the infantry dismounts, it runs east. Not a single person, not one continues the attack, continues the assault. Look at that. I see problems in the conception of the operation. I see problems in the timing of the operation. I see problems in the execution of the operation. I see soldiers that lack any of the fundamental skills that a soldier needs, including hitting the deck when you're being shot at, including something as basic as, oh my God, they're shooting at me, hit the deck. You know, this is one of the many, many reasons. Look, we're talking about the vicissitudes of war. Things go the Russians' way, things go the Ukrainians' way. But there is no way the Russians are going to win this war. This is a quagmire. This is a threat to their nation every bit as real as their collapse in World War I. These armies are going to eventually turn wholesale against their officers. It's going to happen, Alan, I promise you. You can't lead soldiers into these wasteful attacks again and again and again. And we're starting to see, as we have seen virtually every week, acts of mutiny, acts of insubordination, mutinous assemblies. That's the way it's going to go. And those forces are brittle. And when they're finally hit, they're going to collapse.
You know, what happens to those soldiers who record the videos for President Putin complaining about the conditions that they live in, complaining about the orders they are given to fight in? Those soldiers are put back in the front lines and are the first in the next meat wave. Well, that's how they're treated.
Well, we've seen them handcuffed to trees, beaten, raped, murdered, summarily executed. And again, it isn't me and wishful thinking. History shows from time immemorial, from the first Punic War, if you treat your troops like that, they're going to turn on you. They are. And, what was real in military science 2,700 years ago is real today.
Well, many stories and videos come to Chuck's and my attention. One caught my eye this week, Chuck. I think it came from the battlefield in Kursk of a young Russian soldier, maybe 19, who was abandoned by his comrades in the burning wreckage of a Russian BMP. Ukrainian soldiers pulled him from the wreckage, rescued him, and brought him to a field hospital, saving his life. That tells me a lot about the spirit of a Ukrainian soldier. Yes, they are in a war, and in a war, it is your duty to take life. But it is the Ukrainian soldier's instinct always to preserve life. And this is what they did for that young 19-year-old Russian soldier.
Well, and look at the things that occurred. In that Russian BMP, there was no internal cohesion among that crew, right? That vehicle takes a hit. Not one person saw that wounded comrade trapped in the wreckage and did anything to help him. They threw open all the hatches, and it was every man for himself. And I'd also like to say something about the Ukrainian soldiers. They're approaching this burning vehicle, which is very likely to explode. The war doesn't stop for a Ukrainian to commit a noble deed under fire and in danger of a huge explosion. Nevertheless, they went in there, cut this kid from the wreckage, and then, we say they got him to a field hospital. Well, they had to get off the zero line carrying this wounded Russian soldier. They were being shot at the entire way. So there's another one of those little bell ringers. It isn't just a T-shirt slogan, leave no one behind. If you can't count on the guys in your squad, in your vehicle crew, in your airplane, your shipmates, whatever it is, you've got nothing. You've got nothing. And that bit of internal cohesion, that social contract you have with your other soldiers. Because believe me, if you're in an extended conflict, by about 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, you're not doing it for God and country anymore. You're not doing it for General Patton. You're not doing it for U.S. Grant. You're not doing it for President Roosevelt. You're doing it for the guys on your right and your left. That's the men and women in your unit. These guys don't have it. And no army is going to hold together like that, Alan. It just won't. Things are too dangerous. They're too hard. If you, and again, those 3 guys came back and they said, "Where's Fred?" We left him in the vehicle. Check. Got it. Okay. Yeah, I got it. Wow.
Of course, the most obvious contrast with the Ukrainian rescue of this Russian soldier is what the Russian soldiers are ordered to do themselves on the battlefield, and that is to execute unarmed Ukrainian prisoners of war. We have seen this more frequently in the month of October than previously, leading some people to say it has become systemic, perhaps even a policy of the Russians fighting in Ukraine. Take no prisoners.
Well, we saw the king of Chechnya say exactly that. In a news conference, he said, "I have ordered my troops to no longer take Ukrainian prisoners. I live for the glorious day when that tape is played in The Hague." And he can tell us if it was really a joke or not. So certainly in this century, and let's go back one more century to the 20s, there has never been a war in my lifetime or in recent history that is so stark. It is so easy to determine right from wrong and good from evil. And I'm not jumping the shark to say it's only the Nazis that come close to this level of barbarity. Only the Nazis, with a close second being the Soviet army in their reconquest of Eastern Europe. That comes up maybe to the same mark.
I'd say it does. Now, what is happening on the battlefield on the Russian side surely is not going to be lost on the new North Korean troops arriving in Kursk. There's no language barrier that would prevent them from seeing firsthand how Russian commanders treat their troops and how the individual Russian soldiers themselves treat one another. I wonder if this really is a deployment North Korean soldiers want.
Well, I'm going to do a piece next week for the Kyiv Post in the Point of Impact. And let's just look at it this way. There has been just about a division, somewhere around 12,000, and the number may be considerably higher, but the intelligence consensus is there's 12,000 North Koreans presently undergoing training in Russia, with a further 1,500 or so deployed to Kursk Oblast. The Russians took one look at these North Korean soldiers and they didn't rush them into combat. They noticed such significant training deficits that these people had to undergo something that Russia hasn't done in years, and that is complete military training for individual soldiers. Sounds strange. Guys get snatched in Russia off the subway, and 2 weeks later, they're on the zero line in Ukraine. These clowns from North Korea were so pathetic that nobody thought that they were ready for that. How good's a North Korean soldier? Well, I'll get to their special operations forces, which are a different matter. But your average North Korean sent to Russia to fight, and they will eventually fight. They have zero land navigation training. That's one of the things that a soldier must have. You must know where you are all the time, and you must know how to get from where you are to another place. No one in the North Korean armed forces receives training in land navigation or map reading. Nobody. Why? Because they're afraid they'll leave. They'll defect. They'll cross the Yalu. They'll get across the DMZ. North Korean forces are like they're like soldiers trapped in amber for almost 100 years. Their only battle experience has been predicated on Russian and Chinese military doctrine from 70 years ago, right? What do they bring to the party? Mass, right? Numbers. But what worked at the Chosun Reservoir, 1,000-person bayonet charge, that worked in 1950, barely, but it's not going to work on a 21st century battlefield. It just is not going to work. And to our North Korean listening guests, I want you to imagine what one HIMARS round will do to your assembly of 1,000 soldiers. One shot. And it isn't spotter will adjust, I'll call for fire. It doesn't miss. It doesn't miss. And you can set the fuse so you can get the cluster munitions to go right or left, up or down, 45 degrees out, a spot here, a spot here. It's simply not going to work. Russia may be worried that the combat debut of these North Korean soldiers, maybe it's not going to go so well. And we already know 19 have already decided to take a powder, right? These guys realize that they have never had a better shot at freedom than they will have on a Ukrainian battlefield. And we'll see.
That is absolutely true. It's easier to surrender to Ukrainian forces than it is to cross the DMZ and defect to South Korea. Now, these North Korean troops have arrived with some pretty high-ranking generals from North Korea as well. I suppose they are there in a way to observe, or are they there to command?
Well, there are 6 generals known to be deployed. One of them is the deputy chief of staff of their joint chiefs of staff, a colonel general, which is a 4-star general. There are others who are head of the National Intelligence Organization. One other is the head of all of North Korea's special forces. He has a deputy commander with him as well. One of the other generals is in charge of the strategic rocket forces, and 2 other slightly lesser lights, but these are people in the 10 ring of North Korean command. What that says to me, principally, is that the North Korean effort is likely to expand. I don't see them sending this much horsepower, this much star power, unless they intend to grow the operation. So that's what I'm taking away from this. And it's not coincidental that one of these guys is the head of their strategic rocket forces. A big effort, and heretofore, the only combat that we know North Koreans have entered into is firing ballistic missiles at Ukrainian cities from inside occupied Ukraine. The other thing is there's so much made now of the North Koreans are coming, the North Koreans are coming. Well, they've been there for just about a year. They entered Ukraine and started combat service last November. So it's funny how the world, there is no reality, Alan, there's only perception. That's it. You manage perception and you control reality.
Yeah, those North Korean advisors, let's call them, really, they're the ones who push the buttons to fire the North Korean ballistic missiles that arrived about a year ago in Russia. As you've pointed out many times, the operating manual wasn't translated from Korean into Russian. Rather, the North Koreans sent their own men to accomplish the job. Now, it also, I think it's very interesting, as you say, Chuck, for North Korea to deliver that much star power does make you think North Korea may well ramp up this deployment. And the more North Korean troops sent to help Russia, actually, the more combat experience they get in the event that they do want to cross the DMZ and invade South Korea. Is that part of what North Korea is doing here?
Well, they certainly do want the combat experience. That is very important to them. I would remind dear Marshal Kim that the learning curve in combat is perpendicular, right? If you are entering this conflict with all of your tactics, conceptions, aspirations predicated on a war that was fought 70 years ago, you're going to have a lot to learn. Because modern warfare in the last 900 days has changed more than it did in the last 100 years. There was an evolution between World War I and World War II. We started World War I with cavalry charges and we ended with Fokker triplanes. We started World War II with World War I tactics and we ended up with jet fighters and firing radar-guided intercepts. We started this war with what the greatest plan Russia had from 1982, and we are already on a battlefield that it would be unrecognizable to any 20th century graduate of any war college in the world. No one had first-person drones. No one in naval sciences ever conceived that unmanned surface vessels could sweep Russia's most vaunted naval formation, the Black Sea Flotilla. It can no longer operate in the Western Black Sea. It's been defeated by a nation that doesn't have a single large surface combatant. Nobody guessed that. There wasn't anybody. No futurist, no Pentagon paper looking forward. Nobody got it.
And no gambler would have bet on the outcome, really. It was such a long shot. But again, credit to Ukraine for its innovation and for the necessity of practically trying anything. In the event that it works, it's a victory. In the event that it didn't work, it's a learning experience.
And in the early days of the invasion, when Russia was sweeping all before it, Ukraine never once engaged on force. They never took a divisional combat unit and met a Russian division head on. They never did it. They aimed for the elbows and knees. They attacked ground lines of communication. They interdicted nodes of command, control, and communication. They by these asymmetrical means, let's remind what they did. They defeated the most experienced and accomplished and powerful forces of the Russian army. They met them at Hostomel with small forces that were all fighting on their own hook, and they defeated the VDV. They defeated their air assault elements, and again they were able to do this. This war is no longer winnable by Russia. Look, and I know we're talking about Russian gains and what's going to happen over the winter, but there is no plan for Russia to win this. They don't have it. They are in a quagmire. They're losing 1,000 men a day. They recruit 1,000 men a day. 30,000 people join the Russian army, or are forced to meet every month, and their monthly casualties equal the number of inductees. That ain't working, Alan. That's not going to work.
But this might be exactly the reason why many thousands more North Korean troops end up in this war against Ukraine. The deployment of North Korean troops has certainly caught the attention of South Korea, because as you just said, Chuck, on this 21st century battlefield, to date, only Ukrainian and Russian soldiers have had the experience of fighting in a drone-saturated battlescape. Now you are adding tens of thousands, possibly, of North Korean troops to get the very same experience, something that obviously they want to use against South Korea. An unintended consequence of Vladimir Putin's alliance with North Korea, wouldn't you say?
Another unintended consequence, two of the major ones were Finland joining NATO and Sweden joining NATO. President Putin is vicious. He's unconstrained by morality. He is a dangerous person, but he doesn't seem to be able to look even 100 yards ahead. So let's think of the best of the best North Korean soldiers. They were selected, handpicked to come into this war. How's that going to go for them? They have no experience in any sort of combat, no large-scale maneuver warfare. Their planning is not large-scale maneuver warfare. The nation of North Korea would fit many times into the nation of Ukraine. Their generals do not see things in terms of large-scale ground maneuver warfare. Russia has paid the price learning how to fight on this 21st century battlefield. They've lost almost 600,000 men. In addition to the 1,000 men they lose every day. How do you think those North Korean soldiers are going to be led, and what's their combat effectiveness going to be like in this absolute Disneyland hellscape of flying robots hunting down individual infantrymen? They're going to get hosed. They're going to get waxed.
And the ones who survive return to the North Korean army will be telling terrifying stories. I don't think that will encourage the soldiers in North Korea to take a step into such a battlefield. But the South Korean response is a response that I wish would educate NATO and the United States. South Korea has indicated it will deliver military aid to Ukraine. And in fact, today, President Zelenskyy said that Ukraine is developing a specific request for delivery to South Korea. And this has led to a much closer relationship between Ukraine and South Korea. South Korea has always been a member of the Ukraine contact group meeting at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, but now South Korea is considering a much more active role in helping Ukraine.
Right. Recently, this was last week in Seoul, the South Koreans summoned the Russian ambassador and demanded, that is the word, demanded that North Korean troops be withdrawn from Russia. And the Russian ambassador, this was one of those meetings where biscuits were not offered. They were told that South Korea will reconsider whether or not it's going to give lethal aid to Ukraine. So let's rewind just a minute. Putin desperately needed help, right? He gets, among other things, 3 million artillery shells from North Korea, which are about 40% of what he shoots every year. And he gets North Korean combat troops. Did he need them? Oh, yeah, he needs them. Interestingly enough, the Iranians didn't seem to want to send anyone to Ukraine. Any of the other sort of nations in Russia's orbit, they don't necessarily want to send people to Ukraine. And I'd also say this, having North Korea in your corner is not the same as having South Korea in your corner. South Korea manufactures some of the best weapons in the world, bar none. As good as anything made by Raytheon or Boeing or Northrop or any American arms. They are outstanding. Also, the South Korean army is head over heels better than any armed force that the North Koreans can put together. So again, one of those unintended consequences, and certainly not anything that is equal in any way.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if South Korea can deliver military aid to Ukraine faster than the United States has been able to deliver military aid to Ukraine. President Zelenskyy on Wednesday, it was yesterday, complained about the delivery of American military supplies, saying that only about 10% promised have actually been delivered. The Kyiv Post today published an article that says, yes, that seems to be accurate, actually backed up by the Pentagon's own numbers. And the reporter, Stefan Korshak, uses the promise of Abrams tanks, their delivery, and their appearance on the battlefield as just one example. 11 months went by between the promise of the Abrams tanks and its first appearance in battle. I didn't know that, and I was stunned when I read it.
Well, it pretty much sums up Jake Sullivan's pattern here. I much prefer the nation of Norway, that when it announces something, it announces that it has sent 250,000 law rockets to Ukraine 6 months ago. The United States throws a press conference and says, here's a new $400 million aid package for Ukraine. At the same time, it has promised billions of dollars in aid for Ukraine. $1 billion is a million. So if I owed you $1 million, Alan, and I hold a press conference because I've given you $400, it's not making much sense to me. I've said this before. Look, I'm a pretty patriotic guy, but I am ashamed of what the United States is doing to Ukraine. It is unconscionable. Ukrainian cities nightly are having their apartment buildings struck. I just spoke to a person in Kyiv last night. They were getting hammered. And where you don't want to be is in your home, because that's what they're aiming for. You live in a multi-stored apartment building, you are the primary target. Air defense, right? Air defense, air defense, air defense.
Air defense and all the ammunition you need to go with it. I mean, just the increase in drone attacks does eat up air defense. Probably we'll see Russia return to intensive missile attacks as soon as winter arrives in Ukraine. But as a matter of fact, munitions for NASAMS systems were part of the military aid package announced today, $425 million. Also, Stinger missiles, more 155 millimeter artillery ammunition, more TOW missiles, javelins, Stryker armor personnel carriers. Everything that you would expect to see in an American military aid package. Coincidentally, the United States also approved the sale of 100 HIMARS systems to Poland. Poland already has 486 HIMARS systems. Imagine if Ukraine had 400 HIMARS systems.
Well, I really think that Mr. Putin is going to discover what it will be like when Ukraine has 450 HIMARS. When these North Korean troops enter into combat, and, I was giving it a longer timeline, but Secretary of State Blinken said yesterday words to the effect that he expected them to imminently enter combat. And when they do, and when it is definitively proven, it's going to change the complexion of NATO's relationship with this war. Putin will once again have jumped the shark. He jumped the shark when he went for the invasion, when he had perfectly focused the world's attention on Ukraine and his demands by poising his army, I thought, a bit too conspicuously on the Ukrainian frontiers. I thought, you have masterfully played von Clausewitz. You have threatened military force. You have put the forces on the border. You have made your demands. And most of the world, who then couldn't find Ukraine on a map, they're paying attention to you. Then he invaded. And as we all saw it, well, that's going to revitalize NATO. That's going to expand NATO. That's going to turn the Baltic into a NATO lake. You're going to receive sanctions. What are you thinking about? Now, he's internationalizing the conflict with regular North Korean troops, not volunteers, not little green men, not a surreptitious entry of North Korean volunteers. No. He has jumped the shark again, and this is going to blow back on him, Alan. And I pray this is the big one. I pray that this is what finally gets the world to pay attention.
I certainly hope it is. It's gotten South Korea's attention, and we will wait and see. And it has gotten Mark Rutte's attention, the new Secretary General of NATO. This will be a real test for him in just the first few weeks and months of his tenure as Secretary General, a real test of his ability to pull the NATO alliance together and respond with strength and with action. There are things that NATO could do, but let's wait and see. As I guess NATO is waiting as Antony Blinken is waiting for those first North Korean casualties? I don't know.
But you know what's interesting? It shows that Russian National Command Authority cannot look even 200 yards ahead. So one of the bright people at that 40-foot conference table should have been able to say, we are going to turn publicly to North Korea. We are going to engage regular forces of the Korean army into the conflict. What might NATO do in response to this? And some major could stick his hand up and say, well, they're not really giving all that much right now. What if they open the floodgates? What if it wasn't an Abrams here and a $400 million aid package here? What if it were Ukraine gets THAAD systems, not just Patriots? What if NATO decides that it's time for a no-fly zone over Ukraine? What is the Russian Air Force going to do about a no-fly zone? Alan, they've got 6 AWACS planes. They don't even work. They don't have the crews for them. You can't fight an air battle in the 21st century without integrated air battle management. You can't do it. Those 6 aircraft, they're incapable of running a 24-hour, 7-day a week, 365-day a year effort that NATO can do. I hate to say it to our Russian listening guests, NATO can do that standing on its head. The consequences are enormous. And it's almost reassuring to me to see these absolutely fundamental mistakes, to see that we are not dealing with someone who is playing 3-dimensional chess, right? We're not even looking at someone who's playing checkers. They just don't get it.
Well, you know who does look forward on behalf of the Russians? It's the de-escalation managers at the National Security Council in Washington, D.C. They can look ahead beyond any Russian escalation and see the inaction that will be triggered.
Well, it's interesting. Russia just held a full-scale nuclear exercise, launching ballistic missiles and sub-launch ballistic missiles, etc. I note with some amusement, this is the 3rd time this year they tried to conduct one of these exercises. This one actually went forward without a single missile breaking up in the air or detonating in the launch tube and digging a 100-meter diameter crater that was 20 meters deep. So even the nuclear bluster is just no longer working. It simply isn't. I know that the National Security Council may see itself as the last wafer-thin piece of white paper between the world and nuclear obliteration, but it simply isn't going to happen. I've used this metaphor a million times. This is Putin putting a gun to his head and turning his left ear to you, saying, I'm going to shoot you.
Yeah.
Really? Really? Good luck.
Yeah. We are going to go to some maps here, Chuck. Leave the North Koreans in Kursk, where they don't know what's coming for them, I guess. The Russians, by the way, have lost approximately 8,000 men in Kursk as a result of the Ukrainian incursion, which is now beyond 70 days in Kursk. But we're going to move to maps in Kreminna, outside Bakhmut, around Chasiv Yar, and then down the zero line outside the city of Donetsk to Kurakove. There's significant action taking place in each and every one of these areas of the zero line. And just before we get to the maps themselves, after our last show, Chuck, I was thinking about your analysis of Ukraine on the defensive, better preparing defensive lines for Russians to assault, better preparing kill boxes, dialing in the grid in the only way forward for Russian forces to take. And it struck me that, of course, Ukraine and Russia fight this war completely differently. Russia grinding forward, not caring if they lose 1,200 men a day, 1,400 men, 1,800, soon to be 2,000. Whereas Ukraine actually needs to perform each and every day perfectly. This is how closely run Ukraine's defense is. On the battlefield itself, they have to execute perfectly. You and I can think of a couple of times when they did not do that. Withdrawing from Avdiivka is the first example that comes to my mind, and the consequences is down the zero line outside Donetsk City. But am I overstating it that Ukraine must literally execute perfectly every single day and night?
Well, they certainly have to be prepared everywhere along the zero line, day and night, to receive Russian attacks, because we've often postulated this quota system of Russian attacks. Look, do I know that really is going on? You have a quota of attacks? No, I don't. However, you and I plot these maps very, very carefully. I see that numbers of attacks appear to be more important than anything else for these for Russian commanders. I see platoon and squad-sized attacks. I see a number of attacks up and down the zero line. They're not converging. In no way could they be considered one attack. You should, if you're going to lose 1,000 guys a day, why would you lose them over 400 miles of the zero line? Why wouldn't you put everybody in one place? And I can count almost on one hand the number of converging attacks that I've seen Russia undertake. Every attack should be multi-pronged and converging on the enemy. Even the attacks that a SEAL platoon would carry out, we converge on the enemy. We use volume of fire. We use fire and maneuver. Let alone a battalion commander or a brigade commander. We just don't see them undertaking even cogent, even understandable military maneuvers. And it appears to me they're getting worse, not better. That attack we spoke about, the drone filming that 3-vehicle attack by the Russians. And we'll talk about this when we get to Kreminna. They constantly send forward attacks where the assault element is never sufficient to achieve the objective. For example, those 3 BTRs. Did it look like they were going to get to the tree line? And it was 3 BTRs. What happened when they got to the tree line? The Ukrainians are literally going to be opening the hatches and killing them in their vehicles. That's what I mean. That attack was ill-conceived, badly executed, and utterly fruitless.
Yeah, it was, and I think you can actually find that video on Chuck's Twitter feed. But you can find just about everything we talk about on Chuck's Twitter feed or on my Twitter feed. All the maps, for example, you can find, you can download them and blow them up on your computer screen, which is always a useful thing to do because Chuck uses topographic maps, so you can see the lay of the land. You can see the flat farmland and the hillsides, or in some cases the bluffs. You can see all the water courses, etc. And it's a water course on this map of Kreminna that is one of the most significant features. The reservoir, the Zarabets Reservoir and the Zarabets River. The Russians need to cross that water course to make any significant advance. Are they succeeding?
Well, after 24 months, they actually have reached the Zarabets River. And some of them don't. They wish they hadn't. Attacks north of Nevsky, and if you are looking at the map here, you can zoom in and you can see the contour lines that Alan was just speaking about. Ukraine is not constrained by whatever motivates the Russians, right? Ukraine does not carry out a quota of attacks anywhere. And Ukraine is quite good about trading dirt for time. So a lot of these Russian attacks, and you can keep in mind that 3 BTR attack we talked about at the tree line, the Ukrainians will often let the Russians come forward until they are well within the weapons envelope of every Ukrainian weapons system. Then they will engage the Russians. And again, those attacks, most often, the Russian assault element is not adequate to achieve the objective. So once the Russians come into contact, they start being attrited, they start taking casualties. And when they look over their shoulder, inevitably there is no Russian reinforcement. There are no follow-on troops. There is not one or two other Russian units coming to the sounds of the guns and converging on their engaged brothers. No. So the Russians are eventually forced to break contact, either because the commander gives the order, or most often the Russian ground troops dismount and run away. They are annihilated on the way out. So every one of these battle icons on my map, if it's ringed in blue, the Ukrainians won. If it's ringed in red, the Russians won. These attacks all have between 40 and 80% casualties on the Russian side. In some cases, they are wholly and completely annihilated. And that happens about 20% of the time. I can't tell you how quickly some of these situations develop. There was an attack in Kupiansk, 60 armored vehicles. They were destroyed in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. So, but this is a place in Kreminna here. Alan and I have called these guys Russia's, they're underachievers. But in 24 months, and it might be 36 months, Alan, we've been doing this a long time, they've actually reached the Zarabets Reservoir, but I don't think they're going to get any farther from that. The key place on this map are the cities of Zarachene and Torsky, which are at the bottom of the Zarabets Reservoir. The entire Russian effort in this area is to get to the little town of Liman, which they lost, what was it, Alan, 2.5, 3 years ago?
Yes.
And during the Russian offensive. And that was also pretty indicative of what the Russian leadership, they Russian troops were mandated to stay in Liman up and until the city was virtually surrounded, and the only exfiltration route was completely under the control of the Ukrainian troops, which led to the Russian forces being annihilated. So again, it's bad leadership, it's bad execution of the operation, and lacking fundamental skills at the soldier level and fundamental skills at the company and field grade officer level. Everybody is underperforming.
It's here in Kreminna that the Russians have such significant superiority of forces, and yet don't seem to execute well at all. The other feature in Kreminna is the Serebryansk forestry, and this has actually gone back and forth between Russia and Ukraine over the last 8 months of fighting. Sometimes it's a blue forest, sometimes it's a red forest. Not much of the forest itself remains any longer. It has been blasted to splinters, but it is one of the few ways forward with just a little concealment available.
Right. The way to think of that forest is, have you ever played pickup sticks as a kid? Now imagine that tangle of sticks are the size of telephone poles, which is what this pine forest is grown for. They have all the bark blasted off them. They are intertwined. The ground is all churned up. It is an obstacle course that you have to crawl over or under something just to move 5 meters ahead. And whenever you have difficult terrain, no matter what it is, if it's a swamp, if it's a blasted up forest, if it's a hillside, whatever it is, whoever gets there first is going to hold on to it. And especially if you are a Ukrainian soldier in that forest and you can set your watch by the fact that in daylight, the Russians are going to come at you. And this is one of the reasons why they lose 1,000 people a day. They are incapable of operating at night. And that's because of a shortage of course, night vision optics. But their troops lack the ability to navigate at night. If you're up against a unit that even has one thermal camera, you are totally at a disadvantage. Even if they've just got one sniper with a thermal optic, he's not going to miss at anything. So, you're right. This is a place where Russia has maintained as much as a 10-to-1 superiority over the Ukrainians. And this map, Alan, it really hasn't changed much, with the exception of the Russians getting to the river south of Nevsky. It hasn't changed in 36 months.
Yeah, even my poor memory helped me recognize that. I actually have two maps of Kreminna in front of me on my desk here, and the line of contact has not changed significantly. And remember, Liman has been a Russian objective for months and months and months now, but it was specifically an objective of the Russians this summer. And I don't think that the Russians are going to reach and overtake Liman before winter comes.
Well, this is one of the reasons I'm not willing to pronounce that Russia has been on the offensive all summer. An offensive would have taken Liman. They have got the mass, they have got the vehicles, they have got the troops. What they don't have is the training, they don't have the leadership, and frankly, they must not have the will. I cannot help but think that attacks, the spectacular failures that Russia has had, for example, in the battles of Vuhledar 1 and 2, in the recent 20-minute wipeout of 60 vehicles in Kupiansk. They're afraid to roll the dice. They don't want a multi-company attack if it's going to suffer. And I'm not kidding, a minimum of 40 to 80% casualties for whatever force they throw at the Ukrainians. There would definitely be in the American armed forces, someone at the Pentagon is going to start writing some papers about that. Why is it that we're sustaining 80% casualties every time we come in contact with this adversary? Somebody would want to get to the bottom of that in a NATO military. But again, zero Fs are given at the staff level of the Russian army. They don't care. Your human casualties are irrelevant. The only thing that Vladimir wants to hear is you've taken some terrain. And it doesn't matter if that terrain is militarily inane, for example, crossing the Zarabets River to the south of Nevsky. So what? But hey, we've crossed the river, boss. You're a good boy, Vladimir. You're a
And they are boys. You were speaking about Kupiansk just a moment ago, Chuck, and it was in Kupiansk earlier this week that some of the youngest recruits in the Russian army were taken prisoner, surrendered to the Ukrainians. 19 years old. One of them had indeed only been on the front line for 2 weeks.
Alan, I mean, I've talked about this. It breaks my heart to see teenage boys thrown into this oven. It breaks my heart. We talk about war all the time, and we don't necessarily mention very often war sucks. It's a blight. It's a bacillus that is in humanity. Nothing good comes from war. But unfortunately, when you are attacked, when your children are literally being snatched away from their parents and dispersed around a aggressor nation that has 12 time zones, when your women and children and old folks are being sexually assaulted, when you're invaded by this rapacious horde, you've got to do something. You have to fight. You've got to. Russia speaks the language of violence. That's the only language they understand. And unfortunately, the strategic aim of this war needs to be the destruction of Russian military power. That is more important than gaining or regaining ground in Ukraine. You have to take this tool, this implement, away from Vladimir Putin. You have to destroy his army. That's what's necessary for the security of Europe and certainly the security of every nation that was once a Soviet satellite. It's what, unfortunately, we're going to have to do. There's one thing about the SEALs. None of us liked war. We're all peaceniks. But we thought, if you're going to have a war, send in the surgeons, right? Send in its economy of force, right? And a remarkably small amount of damage can cripple your adversary. You just have to know where to hit them.
Well, only by destroying the Russian military machine can Ukraine restore its 1991 internationally recognized borders and keep them secure in the future. If we move to the next map down in Bakhmut and to the west of Bakhmut, beneath the ramparts of Chasiv Yar, there are natural ramparts. Chasiv Yar absolutely blasted by glide bombs and air strikes, and yet it holds I guess the Russians are attempting a kind of encirclement of Chasiv Yar, but it's pretty tough going.
It is, and if you are looking at the map, you can see the canal that basically separates Bakhmut from Chasiv Yar. It isn't actually a very big waterway. It bears a lot of resemblance, and if anyone has been to California, you've seen the sort of aqueducts in the San Joaquin Valley. They aren't very broad, but they are just deep enough that you're not going to get a vehicle across it. And that's kind of all it takes. This is also intuitive, I think, to most people. The canals are taking advantage of the local terrain. Of course, water is going to go to the lowest point, and it's going to head to the lowest point. So these canals were engineered to conform to the topography, and coincidentally, they function as a defensive. They firm a defensive position up. So north of Chasiv Yar, you can see the canal takes a kind of jog, a nose-shaped kind of jog to the west around Hrohovika. The Russians have actually managed to cross the canal several times, but they are frequently beaten back for a lot of reasons. You can cross the canal with an armed force, but in order to hold it, you have got to resupply those troops and reinforce them. Your crossing point at the canal has to be some sort of improvised bridge or a combat engineering vehicle designed to lay bridges. That becomes the point of vulnerability and the single point of failure of your entire expeditionary force across the canal, right? So the Ukrainians will let 100 guys cross, they blow up the bridge, they prevent them from being resupplied or reinforced, and then they annihilate them. It's been at least, I don't know, quite close to 2 years now that Bakhmut has fallen. Alan and I have been saying, the whole battle here in Bakhmut is really the Battle of Chasiv Yar, and it still holds. And if you are looking at the Halloween, the 31 October map, it was a day in which Russia had constrained its offensive operations. They are drawing a breath there. We only have 2 airstrikes. I decided to go ahead and print this map up anyway because it's a good opportunity to see where the lines are without the battle icons obscuring it. And this will give you a pretty good idea of the state of the situation here. And Alan, again, if I told you to close your eyes and imagine the Bakhmut area battle space map, this is probably what you think, because it's been like this for months.
At least since last April, basically. It just hasn't changed in nearly 7 months' time now. So it's it makes you wonder about the tremendous cost that Russia pays for these very incremental advances in some cases, as you say, Chuck, to occupy meaningless land on the zero line.
Yeah, and they have advanced here. I mean, it took them 6 or 8 months, maybe 18 months actually, to take the town of Ivanivsky, which is the first exit if you're leaving Bakhmut, the first exit on the H-32 highway. And they have been able to push west, but it has been at prohibitive cost. Very conservatively, Russian casualties in this area of operation are well north of 50,000 troops. That is the sum total of all American casualties in 10 years of war in Vietnam. To lose 50,000 people, and I don't want to say to take one city. They have taken Bakhmut, but Bakhmut is the appetizer, right? Chasiv Yar is the dominant defensive position here. They're not close to taking Chasiv Yar. They have destroyed it. There's nothing left. But the thing about destroying a city and a three-dimensional battle space, the rubble is just as effective as a defensive position as the city ever was. And again, as Kreminna, this is another one of those places. Doesn't Putin want it? Doesn't he want Chasiv Yar? Don't you think that the stooges he's put in power here, they know that they're not going to get a nicer apartment in St. Petersburg. They're not going to get to go to the Mediterranean on their yacht unless they deliver this city. And they can't do it, Alan. Not with the troops they've got, not with the leaders they've got, not with the quality of trade. They're just, it isn't going to happen. And it's already, the number of Russian dead in this area of operation may really be closer to 70,000. It might even be 100,000. This is one of the prime areas of effort in all of the zero line. You just can't imagine that. Russian casualties are approaching 600,000. That's more than the United States lost in World War II.
Actually, Chuck, we are only 3 or 4 days from hitting 700,000 Russian casualties, killed, wounded, taken prisoner, missing in action. And I think when we're back together again next week, we will be reporting on the 700,000 Russian casualties of this war at the rate they are going. 1,200, 1,400 a day. It's just 3 or 4 days away at this point. And some of those casualties are going to come here at the bottom of the hills around Chasiv Yar.
Well, they absolutely will. And again, if you get down into the terrain here, there are a series of ravines, wadis, water courses. Yar is a word in Ukrainian. It actually means ravine. And unfortunately, Chasiv Yar actually means peaceful ravine.
Yeah.
But it's just, again, I'm not willing to say that there was an offensive this summer, Russian offensive. They have taken, in the month of October, approximately 400 square kilometers. They've made some gains. They lost 1,000 square kilometers in Kursk, right? And their advances are not uniform everywhere. We just saw Chasiv Yar essentially static. We saw essentially.
And the next map down west of Donetsk around Kurakove. This is not static. This is I don't know if it will become a decisive battle, but it is certainly a hot one. And Ukraine has reinforced Kurakove in order to meet the Russian attack.
Yeah. If you are looking at that map, 1501 November, you can see that big Russian arrow pointing down towards the Kurakove reservoir. That is everything to the west of the rail line is a recent Russian acquisition. They have pushed very hard here. And what you're looking at here is the lower, most southern battle area of the Donetsk battlefront. And also, this is likely to be the high watermark of what was the Russian effort after the fall of Avdiivka, as Alan was mentioning earlier. Ukraine got caught with its pants down. They fought long and hard in Avdiivka, which they held for 11 years, 12 years. But they didn't take time to layer their defensive positions. So the Russians, when they were able to take Avdiivka, they have pushed west very hard toward Pokrovsk. Down here in Kurakove, that's the sort of southern limit of the Donetsk battlefield. If you are looking at that map, it's interesting. You can see the battle icons, and many of them are 1, 2, in some places 3 kilometers east of the zero line. So Ukraine is fighting a battle that includes not only defensive fighting but also offensive fighting. If you're in contact 2 kilometers east of the zero line here, you've brought the fight to the Russians. I strongly suspect that Russia is going to get to the rail line, and they are likely going to take the town of Beretsky, which you can see on the reservoir. That thin piece of land to the north shores of the reservoir. This is the kind of terrain were I a general commanding, and I am not, but this is the kind of terrain I would be likely to give up. Even taking that, one of the reasons I'd be likely to give that up, it isn't going to directly threaten Kurakove itself. The reservoir is a pretty solid defensive barrier for the left flank of Ukrainian forces holding Herojam, which also isn't much of a city now. It has been bombed, it has been rocketed, it has suffered artillery barrages. The real money shot here actually is the H-15 highway. Everything else isn't really militarily significant. And you can see there are, 2, 4, 6 battle icons there to the east of the reservoir and going north and south. So this is a place to watch. We have to admit there's been Russian gains here, but you're fighting along a 600-mile front. There are places you can sustain territorial losses, and there are places that you want to basically hang on to. The other thing I'm saying, with the exception of Pokrovsk, which I don't think Russia is going to reach, there isn't really any place of strategic or even tactical significance that the Russians are aiming at. There is no place the Russians are fighting right now that is going to be a springboard for a greater Russian offensive. It just isn't happening because they're fighting without a plan, Alan. That's what I really think. There is no big plan. It's these piecemeal, grinding attacks. That's the plan.
And they do take a toll, obviously, on Ukrainian defenders. I saw a report earlier this week that, and again, this goes back to my comment earlier about essentially Ukraine having to fight perfectly, that in many areas where we have seen Russian advances, as incremental as they have come at the moment of Ukrainian rotation of troops, which leads me to believe that, there are Russian spies. They are apprehended every single week by the Ukrainian SBU. There are Russian spies at work on and around the zero line. This is exactly the kind of timing that they are looking for and that they would give to the Russians. And this is when some of the Russian advances have occurred.
Yeah, and you always need a counterintelligence effort, right? So intelligence is what you gather against the enemy. Counterintelligence are the defensive and security measures you take to, keep your plans secure, to keep your communications secure, and to neutralize enemy intelligence operations against you. So Ukraine needs to carefully look at what are the tells, right? This could be a tell. If there's a little road junction to the west of the zero line and the arriving troops who are going to relieve units at the front, if they always congregate in that spot before they move to the line, and there is a Russian spy who can communicate that, I mean, that's a tell. Generally, throughout this war, Ukrainian tactical intelligence has been really good. They have thoroughly penetrated Russian communications, and we know that Russia lacks secure communication systems. They are often using, quite literally, the walkie-talkies you can buy at Walmart. They are using those for tactical communications. And I mean the same Chinese-made pieces of garbage that you carry on your hunting trip. So, look, the other thing is, I mean, I sit here and shit talk the Russians constantly. You can't underestimate the enemy in this regard. They don't care how many casualties they sustain. They don't care whether a daylight attack is going to be absolutely fruitless. All they want to do is attrite your resources. Even if they can't attrite your manpower because you've utterly eviscerated this attack, they want to make sure you fire those bullets. They want to make sure you are compelled to reveal your positions by firing. They want to soak up your artillery shells. They're willing to do that. And the Ukrainian armed forces are never willing to do that. They husband and they regard as precious their manpower resources. Another reason why I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians are able to take Beratsky here on the north shore of the reservoir. To me, it isn't. Beretsky is not the gateway to Kyiv, right? It just isn't. And if you're going to fight with your back against that lake, against possibly superior numbers of Russian forces, there isn't a point in doing that.
Right.
Just isn't.
And again, this is Ukraine conserving its resources, but its most valuable resource, Ukrainian lives. Enough Ukrainian lives have been given in defending Ukraine, but we know that many thousands more will be given. Ukraine is actually recruiting another 160,000, and these are desperately needed individuals on the front line. They will receive pretty good training before they take one step into battle. In fact, I think that you, more than I, might well be talking to Kevin Leach, who's one of the military trainers in Ukraine, about the intensity of the training and how he gauges success. But the Ukrainian soldier is well trained before he takes one step into battle.
Right. There is a large French training contingent in Ukraine now. And I have had the pleasure of working with the French armed forces around the world. And contrary to what most people think, they are highly professional, highly proficient soldiers. Some of their units, for example, the Commando Hubert, are as good as anybody anywhere on earth. They are some good troops, and the Ukrainians are receiving, that's some great training. So, there are some things that are inevitable in this war, and they are inevitable in all wars throughout history. The quality of individual soldiery is important. It is never irrelevant. A better trained soldier will always prevail over someone who is a civilian, a partisan, with rare exceptions, and an undertrained soldier is the most vulnerable person on the battlefield. I cannot imagine entering combat with no clue as to how to navigate. How do I know where the bad guys are? How do I know where the good guys are? If you cannot read a map, if you cannot use a map to call in artillery fire against your adversaries, if you cannot conduct the basic evolutions of combat, and I'll go all the way down to here, if you don't have the sense God gave a goose and you're under fire and you don't even hit the deck, as we saw in that tree line video, good luck, brother. Good luck. Someone who isn't even trained to hit the deck and shoot back.
Isn't that one of the very first drills?
It's hard to overcome your instincts for survival and hit the deck. You don't even have to train somebody. It's like, I hit the deck.
Yeah. Look for that video. It's a video worth watching, and it is from the drone's perspective, high above the battlefield. But you will have a chance to listen to Chuck in one ear, watch the Russian tactics unfold on the battlefield, and fully understand what Chuck is talking about. So I encourage you, follow Chuck on Twitter, download the maps that he's put up, and that will be coming again in the next few days. We are going to keep our eyes on Kurakove. We will revisit Kupiansk and Kreminna, Chasiv Yar, and of course we will revisit Kursk in the coming week. What Ukraine needs is the fall rain, and there is nothing more than showers in the forecast for next week. Chuck, temperatures remain relatively mild in the 40s and 30s Fahrenheit, dipping down to the freezing mark. So it's cloudy, partly cloudy throughout most of eastern Ukraine, with showers coming next week, but not the steady rains of autumn. So I know that Ukraine is just holding on in a way. They are hoping for weather to help them, and it will. Winter's not far off. They are hoping for a lot more support from activated allies like South Korea. And they are hoping, as we all are, that the election in the United States doesn't decrease aid to Ukraine, rather it increases American willingness to see this war for what it is, not just a defense of courageous Ukrainian people, their families and their towns and their homes. It is truly a defense of democracy and freedoms that Europe and the United States and so many countries around the world benefit from. We can't let Russia take that away from us or anyone.
You know, Ellen and I were talking backstage before today's show. There may actually be more than a silver lining in this North Korean intervention. This may finally be what focuses NATO, if not the United States, and frankly, I not very often do I say I'm ashamed of my country, but I am. I'm ashamed of her conduct in this war. It is, I cannot imagine. I have never seen national security affairs as mishandled as they have been in the last 3 years. Just haven't seen it. But I think Europe is grasping what's at stake here. Not just the freedom and liberty and prosperity of the Ukrainian people, were that not enough, but we're truly talking about the security of Eastern Europe and of the Baltics. And anyone, just for a moment, close your eyes and imagine what life would be like in a defeated and occupied Ukraine. Just imagine. Maybe you can't imagine the city of Mariupol now is utterly destroyed, and it's surrounded by tens of thousands of mass graves of Ukrainian citizens who were obliterated by the Russian army. We have the Holodomor to look back to, the engineered famine that Joseph Stalin inflicted on the Ukrainians. The objective, the aim is still the same. Putin's carrying Stalin's torch. Yeah. Little thing on Twitter, they're recasting statues of Stalin.
Which is hard to believe. I saw that too. We'll talk about that, I think, in the next show, Chuck. I hope that my grandchildren don't see recast statues of Vladimir Putin as some way to honor his success in Ukraine, when you and I and so many tens of thousands of people around the world are working for Ukrainian success and ultimate Russian failure, not only on this military adventure, but on the economic adventure they're on at home. So please do follow Chuck Farrar on Twitter. That's where you can find these maps. Please do follow us here on the Information Warfare Initiative. Subscribe, share, like, and leave your comments down below under this recorded video show, and take a look at the description of the Information Warfare Initiative. You will also find verified charities on the ground in Ukraine that, if you so desire, you can give a helping hand to. Tune in to Jonathan Fink of Silicon Curtain. Watch Beefeaters, very educational videos. All these offerings here on the Information Warfare Initiative. And we're only a few weeks into this initiative, Chuck.
Yeah, so please do watch it. It's not just Alan and I. It is, there are a lot and a growing number of experts who are coming to the IWI. We want this to be a large and multifaceted effort. There's a lot of different components to the Information Warfare Initiative. And again, we want to help you dominate your own information microcosm, right? We want you to win that, doesn't have to be an argument, win that discussion at the bar, at the cocktail party. We're going to arm you with news, good and bad. We're going to give it to you because it's the truth. It sets you free. So please do tune in. And I just want to also plug Alan. If you're looking at my channel, half of the stuff I get is from him. So give him a follow as well.
Really only about 10% of the stuff you get, Chuck. But thank you for that plug. Yes, follow me too. Follow both Chuck and me. And please do join us whenever we're here with indications and warnings, and join us whenever we sign off by saying Slava Ukraini.
And Herojam Slava.